Hear in just a moment from Ben Schott from the National Weather Service. Sally is expected to make landfall in Louisiana as a Category 2 hurricane. And I know there's been a little bit of confusion about that, but he'll try to clear that up in just a moment. I know for a lot of people, it seems like this system came out of nowhere, and that's sort of the way it seems for me too. Because as recently as Friday morning, we didn't think we had much of anything to worry about from this particular weather system, and it just started changing very, very quickly. But we do need people to take this storm system very seriously for the reasons that are going to be outlined here in just a minute by Ben Schott. And I want to hit the high points on that very quickly. Since yesterday, the forecasted storm track has shifted slightly towards the west, which brings more of Louisiana into play, particularly around the New Orleans metro area. I did have an opportunity this morning to speak with President Trump. I made him aware of the storm and its latest track, the concerns we had here. Also, I will be submitting later to him a request for a pre-landfall federal declaration. And while I was on the phone with him, I asked him for more assistance related to Hurricane Laura, by the way, which was just a little over 2 weeks ago, specifically asking for 100% federal cost share related to the emergency protective measures and debris removal related to that storm. Over the past couple of years, as folks in southeast Louisiana are well aware, we've been spared the worst of several storms that had been forecasted to be stronger than they ultimately proved to be, and so forth. And you know that I'm talking about storms Marco and Cristobal and going back to Barry. I want people to understand that we're very fortunate that that happened, but you know, I guess it's kind of like all of those disclaimers you get about stocks. You know, past performance is not an indicator of the future, and we have really good reason to be very concerned about this storm, particularly because it is going to be a very slow-moving storm. It will be a Category 2 at landfall, and that landfall is coming early Tuesday morning. So about 36 hours from now, along a path that's very similar to what Isaac took. And so you all remember Hurricane Isaac from 2012. And so based on all the available information we have right now from the National Weather Service, from the Hurricane Center, and our in-state meteorologists, we have every reason to believe that this storm represents a very significant threat to the people of southeast Louisiana. Currently, there's a hurricane warning in place from Morgan City to Ocean Springs, Mississippi, and a tropical storm warning between Morgan City and Intercoastal City. We only have to go back a couple of weeks to a storm that moved from a tropical storm force to a strong Category 4 in 36 hours. Well, this storm is going to make landfall 36 hours from now, and while it's not forecasted to have that same rapid intensification, it is also true, as the National Weather Service and Hurricane Center will tell you, it is the rapid intensification of storms that is the hardest to forecast. So it certainly could become stronger, but we know that it's going to be very slow moving. And the slower it moves, the longer the winds generate the storm surge, and the longer the rain bands have to just drop torrential amounts of rain in the area. And if you look closely when Ben puts this graphic up here in just a moment, there's going to be a period of time where the storm center is expected to take about 12 hours to move from Kenner to Hammond. I want y'all to think about that. Think about how much rain will fall during that time period. So every update that the Weather Service gives over the next 24 hours is going to be very important. We ask people to pay attention to the weather, pay attention to local news broadcasts, pay attention to your local elected officials, and heed warnings. If they're related to mandatory evacuations, if they're related to voluntary evacuations, anything else that they're putting out, it's very important that you pay attention. So now to go through the specifics, I'm going to ask Ben to come up, and then I will come back up on the other side of Ben in order to complete this press conference.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin Schott. I'm the meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service office in New Orleans. We're here to talk a little bit about what will soon be Hurricane Sally. As the governor mentioned, the track is moved a little bit to the west, so that does put almost all of southeast Louisiana at play for significant impacts. As he had also mentioned, there is a little bit of confusion about whether it will be a Cat 1 or a Cat 2 at landfall. With our coordination with the Hurricane Center, it is expected to be a low-end Cat 2 at this current time. If you look at the current graphics from the Hurricane Center or the public advisory, you'll notice that the wind speeds that are there at those individual points are Cat 1, but what is expected to happen is between those points as it approaches the coast, it is to intensify to a Category 2. So at that point in time, as it reaches the coast right now, it's possible we could see winds of 100 miles per hour with gusts to 120 along the coast as Sally makes shore. As the governor mentioned, and I want to kind of double down on his comments with, as someone who's been here for just a couple of years now, and so what would be considered a newbie for most folks in the state of Louisiana who's experienced many of these storms. I've been here for, as he mentioned, Cristobal, Marco, last year Barry, and for a lot of folks, they saw not the rainfall that they were expecting or not the winds that they were expecting. And as the governor mentioned, I think we were very lucky and blessed that occurred that way. I do not believe we're going to be this lucky this time. And so I think for everyone, if you are in southeast Louisiana, you need to prepare now for hurricane force winds. And you should prepare now for all the impacts that Sally can bring. And with that, we'll kind of start walking through some of those impacts as we're expecting them over the course of the next couple of days. So first of all, as you can see on the map that we have up here, here's the current track. Kind of gives you a basic timing of it coming across the Gulf through the rest of the weekend and into early next week. And as the governor mentioned, you see a significant slowdown as it pushes up against a large area of high pressure and really slows down as it approaches the coast. When it approaches the coast, it could be as slow as 3 or 5 miles per hour. And so again, the rainfall with that will be quite prolific at times. And so we have a pretty good certainty on that track. I think the one thing that we're still watching, as the governor mentioned, will be intensity. And we'll be watching over the course of the next 24 hours to see if it's impacted by any kind of shear as it approaches into the northern Gulf. That would be the only limiting factor at this point because the sea surface temperatures are well above average and will provide plenty of energy for it to continue to intensify as it moves across the Gulf. Starting to work through some of the threats associated with Sally. Like I mentioned earlier, as it comes on shore, we're looking at winds possibly of 100 miles per hour with gusts to 120. As this map shows on the screen right now, again, pretty much if you are anywhere in southeast Louisiana, you should make the assumption right now that you may see hurricane force winds. The hurricane force winds will have a width of about 40 to 60 miles. So it's not a particularly really large storm with its wind field, but if you are in that wind field, obviously 100 miles per hour with gusts to 120 will do significant damage, power outages, etc. there with structural damage. And then outside of that, another 20 or 30 miles, you'll see winds in excess of roughly 60 miles per hour, which will take down power lines, poles, trees, and can do some structural damage depending on the quality of construction that it's impacting on. So with this being the case, again, I think we should assume that there probably will be some widespread power outages, structural damage occurring just from the wind threat itself. And again, the window is limited with time to actually go out and make preparations to secure items outside so that there isn't anything extra being blown around and debris that can be caught up in the winds. The next threat I'd like to talk a little bit about will be the surge. So obviously the winds are what everybody tends to focus in on, what category storm it is, but surge tends to be the number one killer. And so in this case, though, a lot of the area that we will see the heaviest surge or extreme surge in excess of 9 feet is basically along from the mouth of the Mississippi up towards the Lake Bourne area. And so in that area, again, 7 to 11 feet, there'll be areas that I'll see more than 9 feet possible. And if this were to intensify just a little bit more, that could come up. The slowness of the movement actually helps increase the surge, and that will be something that we'll also be paying attention if it were to slow down a little bit as it's coming on shore. The track means almost everything when it comes to storm surge. So any wobbles in the track can shift this 20, 30 miles. And a recent example is what we saw with Laura, where thankfully, or not so much thankfully, I guess, for some folks, like over towards Grand Chenier, they saw the 15 to 18 feet, but the largest didn't work its way up into Lake Charles with it. So this is something where it'll be very track dependent, and we'll keep an eye on that, because whether it makes landfall continues to show that it will make it to the west or east of the mouth will have a huge impact on these numbers. But with the current forecast, this is what we're looking for right now. And again, you can see the impacts from the surge extend far away from the actual center of the storm. And so for folks, as long as you're not, you don't have to be along the track to see the most damaging surge. There can still be some significant surge even well away, as you can see, even as far away in Alabama and the Mississippi coast. I think the next biggest threat, even though if 100-mile-per-hour winds and 9 to 11 feet of surge isn't enough, is going to be the heavy rain and the flooding with this. There's been coordination with our folks at the Weather Prediction Center to start to ramp up some of the precipitation totals here. Some of the recent guidance show that as much as maybe 15 inches of rainfall could be possible in the city of New Orleans. Most likely as an average, we could see anywhere from 6 to 12. Areas that get under the most heaviest rainfall bands could be measuring rainfall in feet. It would not be that unheard of. I think after the fact, we look back at this event that we don't see some places that are measuring rainfall anywhere from 24 to 30 inches. It's all going to be about again the speed of it coming on shore and where those bands set up. And so it's something that we can't tell you exactly where that's going to happen right now. But again, if you're in southeast Louisiana, especially if you're anywhere, whether it be on the North Shore or in New Orleans proper, or anywhere in that area, I think you need to go ahead and think about hunkering down and not trying to drive through those rains, because the flooding is also a huge killer when it comes to these events. People trying to move about when you can't see how much water is around. So again, the flash flood watch is out. And you do notice it extends now as far west as the Baton Rouge area. So though I've made a lot of references to southeast Louisiana and New Orleans, I want people, even in Baton Rouge, to kind of keep an eye on this, because you could still get under some of those heavy rain bands. You could have the flooding issues. And if for some reason it does jog another 20, 30 miles, even a little bit more to the west, you're at play for some pretty significant winds. So all of us need to take those precautions now. We need to make sure that we are doing what we need to do to protect ourselves, our family, and our property. And the window, again, as the governor mentioned, is short. And with that, I'll wrap up my discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. So for folks who were listening to that, and I hope that's everybody, coming a couple of weeks after Hurricane Laura, that should have been a sobering forecast of what we can expect in southeast Louisiana. And the impacts are going to be significant 36 hours from now, and then it'll be the 36 hours subsequent to that when those impacts are going to be felt. So this is all going to happen pretty quickly. Thank you, Ben, for that information. Would remind everybody, don't focus so much on the cone because the storm impacts, the winds, the rain, the surge, they're going to be felt well outside of that. And I am particularly concerned about a number of things, but the storm surge, the rain, You all know from relatively fast-moving hurricanes that rain bands can feel stationary for a long period of time. Well, that's even more the case when you have a very slow-moving hurricane, which is what we're going to have here. And wherever those rain bands set up, they have the potential to drop just tremendous amounts of rain. And this rain is going to be falling into rivers that are not going to be emptying into lakes. And so that's another challenge that we have with this particular storm. Everybody should take this seriously. Please understand that you should be moving now, acting now, to get you and your family ready for this storm. And the hazards aren't just the immediate storm itself, and we've seen this in Hurricane Laura, but they extend to driving, as been alluded to, along roadways that have water, that are standing, and you don't know how deep the water is. You don't know if there's current, and quite often, and it doesn't take much in terms of water depth or current to wash a vehicle off the road entirely. And we've seen a number of people who've died from that. So asking people to be extremely careful. With all of the weather we're expecting to come in and how little time we have to prepare for it, we were going to be closing offices in 17 parishes that are currently under the hurricane warning. I'm going to go through those very slowly here in just a moment. More could be announced ahead of the storm, depending on any adjustments to the track and so forth. But as of right now, on Monday, the following parishes will be closed: Ascension, Assumption, Jefferson, Lafourche, Livingston, Orleans, Plaquemines, St. Bernard, St. Charles, St. James, St. John the Baptist, St. Martin, St. Tammany, Tangipahoa, Terrebonne, and Washington. We still have 4 parishes that will be closed because of widespread power outages in southwest Louisiana from Hurricane Laura, and those are Allen, Beauregard, Calcasieu, and Cameron. We expect just what we saw after Laura, where widespread power outages really extended from the area around Monroe all the way down into Cameron Parish. That's going to happen across southeast Louisiana as well because of the wind and because of the rain too, because when the ground is saturated, it doesn't take as much wind to actually blow a tree over into the power lines and all of that sort of stuff. So people should expect power outages. I can tell you that between the co-ops and Entergy, CLECO, there are already 2,500 line workers and contractors ready to go and staging across southeast Louisiana. They will be calling in 2,000 to 3,000 more very shortly thereafter, if necessary. One of the good things is that there's no damage to the infrastructure in this part of the state caused by Laura. And so they're in a better position to going into the storm. The 2 co-ops in the area, Southeast Louisiana Electric Cooperative Association and the Washington St. Tammany Electric Cooperative, have already sent crews out to Beauregard Electric and Jefferson Davis. They've actually called those crews back, and they've also arranged to have at least 100 more workers using their mutual assistance agreements with other co-ops in the state of Louisiana, but also nearby states. As you can imagine, Entergy and CLECO both have had large numbers of utility workers in southwest Louisiana. They're having to remain there now for safety and for staging, but as soon as they're able, they'll be moving the necessary crews into southeast Louisiana while continuing to work on the restoration of power in southwest Louisiana. But these crews for Entergy and CLECO would likely include another 2,000 to 3,000 workers coming to the southeast part of the state after the storm passes, and it's safe to get those crews in there and start working. We heard this after Laura, so I guess as a preemptive strike, I will say that there aren't any executive orders or COVID regulations in place that prevent line workers from coming in from out of state. That didn't happen for Laura. It's not going to happen now. And in fact, we're already staging these crews. We've already pre-positioned lots of assets around southeast Louisiana, including high water vehicles, boats, crews, generators, pumps, sandbags, large sandbags, and we're currently responding to requests that we get from the various parishes. One of the things that is assisting us is that a couple of weeks ago we prepared for Hurricane Marco. That didn't happen in the way that we had thought, but much of those preparations have already been made and they were left in place, whether they were sandbagging low points of levees or putting in place generators and pumps in order to be able to quickly dewater. Much of that remained in place, and we're moving more assets to southeast Louisiana now. Specifically, the CPRA is pre-positioning flood fighting assets and facilitating requests for pumps in Plaquemine, St. John, St. Bernard parishes, as well as in Jefferson Parish and Grand Isle. In the greater New Orleans area, starting today, the East Bank Flood Authority will be closing the entire perimeter of the hurricane risk reduction system, with the exception of the Mississippi River floodgates within that system. And the reason is the Mississippi River is very low right now, thankfully so. It doesn't pose the same kind of challenges last year when we saw Barry coming into Louisiana. The West Bank Flood Authority will also be closing all gates within the system with the exception of the floodgates along the Mississippi River. Taking into account this storm's similarities in track and strength and so forth to Hurricane Isaac, the CPRA will be focused on areas in the river parishes and along the North Shore to ensure flood fighting assets are deployed there in a timely manner, and not just the CPRA. You're going to see the National Guard there, the Wildlife and Fisheries, you're going to see the Fire Marshal's Office, all pre-positioned there. Anytime there's a hurricane headed towards southeast Louisiana, we obviously pay special attention to communities like Grand Isle and Lafitte, and so we're working with Mayor Carmondale and Mayor Kerner in those areas to deploy and pre-position flood fighting equipment in those locations. St. John the Baptist Parish, St. Charles Parish are obvious challenging areas too if this storm does what we expect it to do and pushes in through Lake Bourne, Lake Pontchartrain, and Lake Maurepas. We remember low-lying areas in those parishes were flooded as a result of Hurricane Isaac and the storm surge, exacerbated obviously by the rain as well. The National Guard continues to provide logistical and security support in cooperation with civilian authorities to mitigate the effects of Hurricane Laura and to prepare for Hurricane Sally. As you know, for the last couple of weeks, we've had 100% of the National Guard mobilized. They remain mobilized, and they're doing tremendous work on a number of fronts right now, but they currently have 5,400 or so on duty, with 1,200 soldiers and airmen, 51 high water vehicles, 32 boats, 8 rotary aircraft, and other assets that are actually in place for Hurricane Sally, or Tropical Storm Sally, which will soon be a hurricane. We're obviously concerned about all of the evacuees from southwest Louisiana who are in southeast Louisiana and the New Orleans hotels. We are making sure that those hotels, and I want to thank the Red Cross because they took over the operation of all of those shelter hotels, and they're doing tremendous work there to pre-position water and food and other things at the hotels in the event that the food service is interrupted for some period of time. And they're taking really good care of those 12,000 or so evacuees in New Orleans. And we're going to make sure that they are safe throughout this storm. And I can only imagine how frustrating this has to be for those individuals from southwest Louisiana who moved over there because of Laura, and now they're being targeted by Sally. You should know there are no plans to evacuate these Laura evacuees, but the precautions are in place, and if necessary, we can quickly move them after the storm. But This storm right now is not forecasted to be the strength that would require us to evacuate out of New Orleans. Secondly, we have this COVID environment. We don't have the hotel rooms available elsewhere in the state, and so if we move them, in all likelihood, they would move to a congregate shelter, which is not what we want to do, and we don't believe that evacuation is necessary. But we will be making sure their needs are met at the hotels, and if it should become necessary after the storm passes, we will quickly move those individuals. I want to continue to thank Mayor Cantrell and her team. They have been fantastic in helping us to work with these evacuees and make sure that they're well cared for. And we are I'm personally am in frequent communication with the mayor about these evacuees and other issues, specifically around New Orleans' preparation for this hurricane. And she told me yesterday she had already ordered the evacuation out of low-lying areas that are outside of the risk reduction system there for New Orleans. We're aware of at least one nursing home that is already evacuating, and others are considering doing so. We know that the time is short, so these decisions about evacuations are going to have to be made very quickly so that they can be implemented before tropical storm force winds actually start impacting the area. We also have 3 jails that have already been evacuated, 1,200 inmates total, Plaquemines, St. Bernard, and Terrebonne parishes. And you may remember it was just a couple of weeks ago that these same inmates were evacuating in advance of Marco. There are a number of parishes with evacuation orders in effect, both mandatory and voluntary. So if you're in one of these areas, please heed the direction of your local officials. Evacuate if you are told to do so. I also want to stress to everyone that as people are buying generators now or pulling generators out and testing them and making sure that they run, please be careful and understand that if you use these generators, you need to do so in a safe way. We've had far too many people killed by carbon monoxide poisoning after Laura. So go ahead and make sure you know the safety associated with generators. Have those generators operating at least 20 feet from your house, not under a window, not near a vent or a doorway, not in a crawl space or in a garage, certainly not in the home. And when you need to refuel your generator, let it cool down for about 15 or 20 minutes before you attempt to pour the fuel into it. We did have one house fire where the house was completely destroyed after Hurricane Laura because that did not happen in that case. Make sure you have a fire extinguisher nearby. And also, if you're going to use a generator, and it's really these are important things to do anyway, have a carbon monoxide detector in your home, battery operated, and you can get these where they also detect smoke as well. That can absolutely save your life or the life of someone in your family. If you haven't done so already, visit getagameplan.org. You've got about 36 hours or so to really get yourself and your family ready for this storm. And it's important that you have all the supplies on hand that you need, whether it's food or water, batteries, flashlights, all the other things that you need. And I will remind you now, we're doing this in a COVID environment. So the public health emergency is not going to go away. It's not going to excuse itself so that we can focus entirely on the natural disaster. So everyone just needs to understand that all of the precautions, all the restrictions and mitigation measures that have been in place, they continue to be in place. And we need people to be safe. What we don't want to happen 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now is because of all the activity that occurs because of Sally, building, by the way, on top of what happened because of Laura and Labor Day and everything else, that we have another surge in cases in Louisiana. We've done that twice already. We don't want that to happen again. So I'm imploring everyone to make sure that you observe all the mitigation measures, like wearing your mask when you're with people who are not part of your household, staying physically distant, from those individuals, staying home if you're sick, washing your hands frequently, all these things. And be especially mindful if you are more vulnerable because of your age or your health condition, or if someone in your household is more vulnerable for that reason. Speaking of COVID, today we reported 1,353 new cases and unfortunately 33 new deaths as well. These are 2 days worth of numbers. You know, we didn't report on Saturday, so these are 2 days worth of COVID numbers. There are also, and I should say that the cases, the 1,353 new cases, were on almost 29,000 tests that were administered. There are 680 patients across the state of Louisiana with COVID who are in our hospitals. That's 43 less than we reported to you on Friday. And we have 107 of those individuals who are in the hospital on mechanical ventilators. That's 10 fewer than our last report. Much like what happened because of Hurricane Laura, as we prepare for and move through Sally, we will not be doing the community testing sites on Monday and Tuesday. We may have to pause for an additional day on Wednesday. We hope not, but if so, we will certainly make that decision when it's necessary to do so and communicate it. So for all of the reasons that I just mentioned, we should all be concerned about COVID right now. We should be concerned about Hurricane Sally, and obviously we should remain concerned about all the folks in Southwest Louisiana, in particular, still trying to recover from Hurricane Laura. Today is Sunday. I encourage people to pray. Of course, every day is a good day for prayer. But as we get ready for this next hurricane and this next set of challenges that are coming our way, let's be good neighbors to one another. Let's lift one another up in prayer. Let's get prepared. And I know that the good people of Louisiana are strong and resilient and will do what's required to meet the demands of this storm. And I will assure you that the state is leaning far forward. And we're going to be there working with our local partners and our federal partners every step of the way to deliver the required assistance just as soon as it is humanly possible to do so. So with that, we will take a few questions. Yes, sir.
You mentioned Friday, this is basically the last face-to-face meeting in the last whether it's the National Guard, hotel availability, things like that. You feel good about the state's ability to respond with
Yeah.
like two-front kind of problems in the
Yeah, I mean, I feel good. I would feel better if we didn't have COVID going on, and I knew that it would be safe to just put thousands of people into our mass congregant shelters that we have in Alexandria and Shreveport and Monroe. We really don't want to do that. We don't believe we're going to have to evacuate just that number of people that would require the activation of those shelters. But if without COVID, you would certainly feel better about that particular situation. You know, if I didn't know our National Guard and our soldiers and our airmen as well as I do, I would be really concerned, because you can only imagine how long and how hard they've already been working. It predates Laura. It goes all the way back to the beginning of the COVID emergency, but they are exceptional soldiers and airmen, and they've got great leadership, and they're going to perform well. I know that the Wildlife and Fisheries ready. We've got the search and rescue ready there. With the Fire Marshal's office, we're calling in search and rescue teams from out of state ahead of the storm, much like we did for Laura. So yeah, I feel like we're in pretty good shape. You know, in New Orleans, the Hurricane Risk Reduction System has that city better prepared for a hurricane than she's ever been before. But that doesn't mean that there won't be challenges. And so the power generation is right at 100% in New Orleans. The pumps are functional right at 100%. We're pumping down the canals in order to increase the capacity there. But if you get 18 inches of rain in 36 hours, you know, I think Aspen, Colorado would flood. So I worry about all of that. I'm not paralyzed by that, but it's just causing us to make sure that we're doing as much as we can in advance of the storm, and really trying to make sure that we communicate effectively, because the last 3 storms or so that were targeting southeast Louisiana did not cause the impacts that had been forecasted. And so there may be some false sense of security, because as I listened to the National Weather Service brief and Ben's forecasting, and by the way, this is also backed up by Jay Grimes, state meteorologist, and so forth. This storm is almost certain to visit upon Louisiana all of the impacts that have been discussed here today. Yes.
Hey, Governor, so Dr. Baylor, obviously, but not to the south. What assumptions
Yeah. Well, we wouldn't do a mandatory evacuation until the storm is going to be forecasted to actually come in as a 3. And so that's not in the cards right now. There hasn't been any discussion like that. And so we don't envision any contraflow, because you wouldn't do that without a large-scale mandatory evacuation from that population center in that greater New Orleans area. Now, having said all of that, we are mindful that Laura went from a tropical storm to a strong 4 in 36 hours. Don't believe that's going to happen here, but if it happens late in the day tomorrow, you don't have time to do that evacuation anywhere, which is why people need to be prepared. They need to get a game plan. They need to have all the supplies necessary so that the first 72 hours, if necessary, they're able to sustain themselves. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. So I have not. One of the calls that I intend to make later today will be with Governor Reeves of Mississippi. But I can tell you that our GOSEP here has been talking to their equivalents in Mississippi, and our state agency leaders are talking. So whether it's the state police or Department of Transportation, you name it. So those conversations have been taking place. And of course, the coordination is that's necessary is greatly reduced if you're not going to do contraflow, and if you're not going to be doing large-scale mandatory evacuations where much of southeast Louisiana is going to go into Mississippi, whether it's across the Gulf Coast or up into Jackson or other areas. But we don't envision that happening right now. And quite frankly, if someone is going to be leaving Louisiana, they shouldn't be going to the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, because the hurricane warning extends all the way over to Ocean Springs. And so if you want to go into Mississippi, you really need to go to points much further north than that. Look, I want to thank you all for helping us to convey important information to the public. We need everybody to be paying attention to this storm, pay attention to the news that comes out of the TV and radio stations. Make sure that you're following the weather reports. Anything that comes from your local elected officials, all very, very important. And let's take this one seriously, and be good neighbors. And again, let's make sure that we're praying for the best possible outcome here. We intend to have another press conference tomorrow, and that will happen we think at about 2:00 again, right here tomorrow. So thank you all.